In this video, I want to talk a little bit about inheritance and using modules. Now, we have discussed inheritance, of course, where you have a parent class and a child class. Now, this is the same thing, but it is possible, in fact, often it is common, to have these classes in their own separate modules. So I want to take a look at how this is done. Now keep in mind that you don't have to do it this way, but think of it as an example of how people in a team might work together. So let's say that somebody goes through on your team and they develop a generic person class that holds information that your company expects personal data to be. So I might go through and make a class like this, like I'll call it the persons py file. And I'll go ahead and put in the code here that checks to see if somebody's trying to run it directly, and just let them know that this is not meant to be ran directly. It's not meant to be a main module. After that, I put in code such as we've seen before. I've got the person class from a previous module where we did the person class with the first name. I didn't bother putting in the last name yet, and a counter just to see how many times the object is made. And if you remember right, that was not really all that important. It was just an example of how a static method would work. And I'm using that actually here as an example of how a static method would work in our situation as well. So the situation being, we're going to take this person class code and we're going to put it in a persons module file. So I'll copy that here. I'll open up good old PyCharm. Come on, PyCharm, you can do it. There we go. Module 8. I don't think we want Module 8. We want Module 9. I hope I saved my work from the other day. Okay, reopen a project, Module 9. Yep, I did. Okay, so we're going to go through and make a new class. I'm going to, a new file, Python file, and I'm going to call it persons. Now, I'm naming it plural as an example of the difference between the name of the file and the name of the class. And this won't make a lot of sense yet, but we'll see that a little later on as we talk about it and work with it. It could have easily been singular, but in our case, let's go ahead and stick with the plural convention right now. I'll paste this code in. I realize that it's not actually everything I could ever want out of it because it's missing like the last name and some other things. But it will serve our purpose, which is basically just to show how you can make a parent class that could later be used for inheritance. So I've got my class. PyCharm automatically saves it for me. Now what I want is code for it to make a child class, a derived class. And so what I'll do is I'll make a class called employees. And I'll import the persons class. Now notice that it's the name of the class is actually person. The name of the file is persons. That's a Python file. And this is important. It's a mistake I've made before. You would think that it would be using the name of the class perhaps, but remember that a Python module is just a Python file can have lots and lots of code. In fact, there's no reason for it not to have more than one class in it. And so the people that created Python chose to import the data, the code from a file based on the file name. Now in this case I import persons. All the code inside the persons script file will be available to me in memory. It loads all the code up into memory, and then I'm able to utilize it. And you can see that I'm doing that here. I'm just going through and saying the employee class is inheriting code from the persons module and the person class. Now, if you had called the file person singular, this would still work. It would just be person.person. It may look a little strange, but it would still work. It could have even been called my collection of parent classes. It could be a long file name, short file name. It really makes no difference. But the way it works is whenever you load up a module in Python, it creates what many languages would refer to as a namespace. A namespace is just an identifier. So all the classes, such as the person class and the persons module, will automatically be associated with this person's namespace. Namespace is a concept you're going to come in see repeatedly in other programming languages as you move forward in your career. So anyway, this is the name of the module or the namespace, and then the actual class that it resides in. In other languages, often the module will be a DLL, or maybe in Java a jar file, Jar. A DLL file is common in a lot of places, usually with C++ or C or C# or VB.NET, or actually it's very common. If you do a search on your computer for DLL files, you'll probably find thousands and thousands and thousands of them. They're all over the place. And usually what they contain is, like these Python modules, based on whatever language it is, it's going to contain some compiled code. Now, the Python module, remember that when you go through and you run the module for the first time, Python creates a little PyCache folder and compiles the code. Again, this would be very similar to how DLLs work or jar files work, but typically you make the DLLs or jar files yourself by compiling them. Sometimes, though, like in the .NET system, Microsoft's .NET, you do actually work with dynamically created DLLs. Microsoft's web environment, ASP.NET, does that. And that's what Python's doing too. It's dynamically creating these compiled files for you. Anyway, that was a lot of information to take in. Let me pare it back a little bit. We're importing the person's namespace, and you use the name of the file, but not the extension. And then later on, if you want to refer to a class inside of there, you just use the namespace and then the name of the class. So now I've inherited the code, and I can add on things like the ID. Now this code isn't anything new. Again, it's the same code as we used in an earlier module. I did that because it's familiar. And so I'd go through and create my employees Python file. I'll use an S there. Put the code in. Remember that if you're copying and pasting from Word, every now and then you'll get some kind of funky, strange character that doesn't appear visually, but it's still there, so you may have to be careful. But anyway, it looks like it's working, and I can't run this because it's not meant to be ran by itself, a main module. So what I would have to do is I'd have to set up a test harness of some type to see if it's going to work. Now let's see, did I put any code for that? Yeah, let's see. Nope, I didn't, but I'm going to mix them right now. So I'll go over the test. And what I want to import is the employees class. Okay, so don't really need all this. I'm just going to go through and say obj e is equal to a new employee object. Oops, I'm sorry, wrong language. We don't need the word new. In C# you would use that. Sorry about that. Also, I don't need the semicolon. Apparently, I'm in C# mode today. Okay, now I should be able to go through and use the ID. And notice that I'm able to set the first name because I've inherited code from the person class. And because I went ahead and overrode the toString method, I will be able to print out the data. And you can see that it does indeed print out the data, the ID coming from employee class and Bob coming from the person class, so it's proved that the inheritance is actually working. Now, as I had mentioned, a single module can hold many classes. And if you have some classes that are associated with each other, same subject matter, for example, you might just include it. So let's say that I add on to the employees class file, or employees module file, like the employee list. This is an object that would collect a list of employees. So I might have a field that was like a hidden field, which was a list of items. And you remember that if you put a couple square brackets there, it'll assume that you want a list object. I'm just going to go ahead and leave that private field all by itself. I'm not going to set up an attribute. You can't make a static method of the constructor, see, but I can go through, I'm not going to make any properties, I can make a static method of my add employees method, and the idea is that if it's static, there's going to be only one of these employee list objects in my application. So it'll actually not be an object as much as just the class itself. An object is a copy of the class code. We're going to work directly with the class. So to do that, I have this private variable, list employees. I make a method, I mark it as static, and say that if you want to add an employee to the list, feed me an employee. For testing, I can print it out to see what's in there. I can do something like this. I can check to see if the class, if I ask for the class property, which if you may remember, we talked about how that will tell you what, print out the text of a particular object. In this case, it should print out class employees.employee like this. For testing purposes, I'll show you what I mean. Actually, let me just go ahead and copy this code. I think it's more fun to, hey, get down there. I think it's more fun to actually see in the coding window and watch it run. So let me go over here. Sorry about my voice. I'm still fighting a nasty little bug. Hopefully you guys can hear me well enough. Okay, so here's my employee list class. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put a breakpoint here. A breakpoint here. And I'm going to go back over to my test py. Now, the employees, there's a problem here. It's one of those invisible little things. Employees file already has both of those items. So I should be able to go through and use the employees.employee list and use the method addEmployee to add my little object. And I'll put a breakpoint here and we'll just see how it goes. So start debugging. Down to this line, it hasn't ran yet. We're going to step into it. It comes over here and it passes over that employee object. And I'm going to print out the class just for testing. But you know, the thing is that, oops, excuse me, can you evaluate this? If I stay there long enough. There we go. Type is class employees.employee. So that's what it should print out. Let's see if it does. I'm going to go over to the console window, and sure enough, that's it. So what I did was I copied this, and I put it in a couple quotes to test to see if the object they're passing in really is an employee. If they try to pass in some other type of object, I don't want it. I only want to be able to add in employees to my employee list. So I'll do some simple validation there. And I'll just append that new employee to my list. And so that finishes that up. And at that point, you know, I'd have, as long as the program's still running, I'd have my employee object inside of that list. So I could also do something like a data process in the data processing py file that we had before. This was from an earlier video. I could go through and add on something like working with a database like Oracle or Microsoft SQL Server or Access or MySQL, whatever it be. So instead of just working with text files, I could have something for working with databases, and that would still be something, the subject matter would be data processing, so I might go ahead and put that code in that same file. So you can see that a particular module file could have many, many different classes. The classes would be associated with a particular subject matter or a particular set of behaviors or tasks. And using this kind of process, you could go ahead and create pretty cool little applications. Of course, before you got there, you'd want to go ahead and add on some more testing stuff. So you'd create a test harness to test the data processor, to test the persons or employees. You go through and you run this code. We don't have anything in the data processor, a database class yet ready to go. So I would expect this to fail if I try to go ahead and call the constructor method of that. In fact, if I scroll up here, sorry about this, you can see that I haven't actually made it ready yet, so I just raised an exception for right now. And the reason why I did that was I would take this code, and let's say it's a Tuesday and I'm still working on it. I'm over here in the data processing class, or module, not class. And I want to work on the data processing piece. So I put in that, you know, it's me working on it, and somebody else may find this file on the share and say, hey, I want to do some database work. So they might go ahead and try to use my module that's on the other team. Now, of course, they could shoot me an email and ask me, hey, you know, is it ready yet? But let's face it, we're all overloaded by our emails already. If I go ahead and just mark it up in here, I save my file out on the share somewhere, network share somewhere, so that if my computer crashes, I can always go get it. Or maybe some source code tools, which we probably should talk about. Well, if any of those occur and somebody goes ahead and tries to use my code, the exception will pop up and say, you know, our class is not ready yet. And so when I make my test harness here, I would expect it to fail. And here's kind of the idea. I can have multiple developers working on this application idea, where I have some people working on the behavior, such as working with databases, working with files. Other people working on the data objects, such as persons, employees, customers, whatever you have. Maybe, who knows, inventory stuff. It could be anything. And I could also have another person on the team actually just going through and testing what's ever out there on the share or in some kind of source control. And using modules like this, they allow me to go through and have multiple people working at the same time efficiently. If we're putting everything in one file, we couldn't like all stand around a computer and work on that one file collectively. Breaking it up into classes and functions and modules, all these little organizational tools that we've been talking about facilitates the creation of much more complex and dynamic applications. So hopefully that makes sense. This is a long video, so I think I'm going to go ahead and finish it up. But that's how you could use modules to interact with inheritance, and just a little bit more about why you would care and what modules bring to the table. Okay, next step, I'm going to have you go ahead and try the same steps I did here. Try it out yourself and see how it works. I'll see you in the next video.